Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. It is time for Friday Reads, in which I catch up on the week in reading and any bookish things that have happened throughout the week. This is an interesting one because, as I had mentioned in my last Friday Reads video, I did take a weekend off from reading last weekend because there was the 4th of July, which is obviously a holiday here in the United States. And we used that as an excuse to have some people over for the first time in over a year and a half. It was lovely. And then Monday was my anniversary. So I didn't want to really be prioritizing reading with all of that stuff going on. And it was a really lovely weekend. Had a really good time. It was weird having people over, but it also felt nice to have that little sense of normalcy again, to be actually celebrating a holiday. We do want to be careful with the Delta variant going around and all of that stuff, but it was nice to have that little sense of normalcy. So my plan for this video is that we will talk about my actual Friday reads at the end. I did finish one book and I have 2 books ongoing. Can't wait to talk to you about all of them, but we'll do that toward the end of the video. My main focus before we get to that is going to be a little bit of a check-in on how I'm doing with my most anticipated reads of 2021 so far. I did just do a new video where I look at the new releases for the second half of the year, and I'm not going to obviously cover them because most of them have not been released yet, but I will link that new video down below and I will link the original video down below if you would like to check that out. I do have a couple of things I want to cover before we get to that though. The first thing is that in that new video about new releases that are coming up for the last part of 2021, I made a mistake. I included Cuyahoga by Pete Beatty. Basically, the long story version of it is that there aren't really a lot of articles from larger magazines about upcoming new releases in the second part of the year right now. There were a lot in the beginning of the year, but there are not a whole lot of updates right now. I found a blog that covered it, and they had included Cuyahoga by Pete Beatty. I'm not going to mention the blog because it doesn't matter. I should have fact-checked it. But they included Cuyahoga by Pete Beatty, and then I thought it sounded interesting, and I thought it sounded like something I would have really been interested in when I was around my early 20s. And then I saw Cuyahoga in a publisher catalog on Edelweiss, and when I saw it there, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to add it. I didn't look closely enough to realize that it was in the publisher catalog because it is a paperback release. So Cuyahoga has actually been out since last year. I didn't realize, I'd never heard of it before. So I am removing it from that list, just as an update to that. And thank you to the person who pointed that out. Sorry, I made a mistake. This is what happens when you decide to do things at the last second and don't really fact check them. Hopefully everything else is fine on that list. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Jen the Librarian did a video where she talks about LGBTQ books in translation, and she is creating a spreadsheet to keep track of LGBTQ books in translation. This grew out of the Invisible Cities project. Jen's approach to that is to try to find LGBTQ reads for all of the countries that are covered as part of that project. And basically, it was a little difficult for some of the countries to find LGBTQ reads, so this spreadsheet is intended to make it a little bit easier to find works in translation that cover LGBTQ themes or authors, things like that. And I think that is a great idea and project. If you would like to check it out, I will link the video down below, which has a link to the spreadsheet, and you can make suggestions about things that could be on that list as well. I recommend it. I think it's a great idea. So please check it out. The other thing I have to cover before we get to my most anticipated books check-in is my question from my 3K Q&A. If you follow along, you know I am going through the last questions that I hadn't gotten to in a video for that. So I'm doing one per week in my Friday Reads video. Question for this week comes from Britta Bowler, and it is, what are your top 3 weirdest things that happened to you on BookTube? I have 2. Hopefully I'm going to wing it and find a third because my prep time for this video got cut short. It is what it is. And I'm thinking of weirdest in different ways. So the first one is weird as in a little bit surprising, and it's how enduring mean comments can be. If you follow along, you also know I had to shut down the comment section on my video about why I will not be talking about a certain author's books on my channel anymore. And the reason I ended up taking it down was that people keep finding that video and leaving mean comments on it. And eventually I just got tired of dealing with them and it wasn't getting anywhere. So I just shut down the comment section. But it's not just that. I remember early on in my BookTube days, I did a video about some feminist books and someone commented to talk about feminism being evil. And it was clearly someone who just searched for the word feminist on YouTube, found my video, and left a comment without actually watching the video at all. So one of the weirdest things, using the weird word as in surprising, is how dedicated these people are to finding content that they can leave comments on, and how enduring that process can be. If you make people mad, they keep finding you. And I guess I kind of knew that, but it is still surprising, and therefore I would classify it as a weird thing that has happened on BookTube. The second thing is also thinking about weirdest as in like a nice surprise, and that is that after I finished a book that I really loved, the author reached out to me on Instagram, and it turned out that in the course of my Friday Reads videos where I talked about the book, they had been following along and said that they enjoyed the conversation about their book, and that was really lovely. I am not going to name the author, not going to name the book, but it was just a really nice thing that they did. It was totally unexpected, and therefore I'm kind of fitting it into something that could be quote unquote weird. And we ended up having a really nice conversation. It was a very lovely conversation, and that was totally surprising and out there. And now I need to think of a third thing, and I don't really have anything. I guess the other weirdest thing would be just that I had very low expectations when I started a BookTube channel. So I guess the other weirdest thing would be that it went well. Well is a very broad term, and I'm using it as such deliberately. But when I started my BookTube channel, my lowest level hope was that I would at least find a couple of people I could talk to about books and have a little bit sense of community about it. And it's been a wild success in that regard. So as somebody who has imposter syndrome on a regular basis, it's weird to me that it has gone well. And it is what it is. I am who I am. So that is going to be the third answer I go with for Britta Bowler's question. Thank you, Britta, for the question. Now let's get into my most anticipated books of 2021 for a check-in. Originally, in the video that I did in January, there were 20 books that I classified as ones that I was most anticipating this year. One of those, the Jennifer Egan, appears to have moved to 2022. So I removed it from the list. So that means there are 19 books left. And of those 19, I have read 11. That feels really good, especially since I am terrible at TBRs. And I think, again, I've talked about this a little bit recently, thinking about it as a pile of possibilities has made it really easy to work my way through these books. I'm not thinking of them as things that I need to read. And I was very intentional when I chose these books, because I didn't just put books that anybody might be looking forward to. I tried to pick books that I was genuinely interested in reading. And I think that helped a lot too. And I'm hoping that I have the same success rate with the books that I just added to this list. And again, I'm not going to cover them in this because none of those books are out yet. So the 11 books that I have read are Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson, Let Me Tell You What I Mean by Joan Didion, The Bad Muslim Discount by Syed M. Masood, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Cherie Jones, Let's Get Back to the Party by Zach Salih. Technically, that one is a DNF. But for our purposes here, I'm going to count it as a book that I read because I have no plans to get back to it. Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, Last Call, A True Story of Love, Lust, and Murder in Queer New York by Elon Green, The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie Walton, Paradise Nevada by Dario Diofebi, Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri, and The Secret to Superhuman Strength by Alison Bechdel. Those are the 11 books that I have read. And the quality of those books is really high. Several of those were featured in my best books of 2021 so far, which is another video I will link down below if you would like to check that out. So I think, again, I did a really good job picking books that I was genuinely interested in reading and that were a little bit tailored to my interests as a reader. And I think that shows in the results. I really enjoyed a lot of the books that I've read. The only disappointments are really Let's Get Back to the Party, which was a DNF. Being honest, I think Let Me Tell You What I Mean by Joan Didion is a good book. It's fine. I am not saying it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it also is something that I frequently forget when I think about books that I read this year, and that's just the way it is. Paradise, Nevada by Dario Diofebi was almost a DNF. I really speed read my way through the last half of that book, and I don't feel like I missed anything for that. So it was something that could have paid off, but didn't really. And I was disappointed by Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, but it's still a good book. So those are the ones that I would say were kind of misses, except that they're still good books, and there's a good chance that you could like them as well. Maybe if you read them, you'd have better luck than I did. But a lot of the other ones are potentially in my favorite reads of 2021 when we get to the end of the year, and they were, in fact, in my best reads of 2021 so far, which again will be linked down below. In terms of the ones that are released and I have not read yet, because there are 2 that have not been released, I have a copy of The Inland Sea by Madeleine Watts, Gay Bar, Why We Went Out by Jeremy Atherton Lynn, Libertie by Kaitlyn Greenidge, There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura. Those are all on deck, and 2 of those are things that I acquired just this month. So spoiler alert for my book haul for this month when I get around to it. Abundance by Jakob Guanzon is on Scribd, so I will probably end up doing that one there. And I have a library hold on Filthy Animals by Brandon Taylor, so I will be reading that whenever my turn comes up in that list. And then the 2 books that are not released yet are Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead and Fight Night by Miriam Taves, and I will figure out how I'm going to handle those when they are released. So all in all, 11 out of 19 is really good, and we will see how I fare with the new bunch of books that I added to this list as the year progresses. So I divided my list, the new list, into 2 different categories, maybes and all-ins. Cuyahoga is removed from the maybe list, and actually I was talking to my husband yesterday, and he said he was surprised that I put the Stanley Tucci list on the maybe. And you know what? He's actually right. I haven't done it yet, but I am going to move that to one of the books that I'm all in on. So let's count how many books I was all in on. So with Stanley Tucci, there are 9 books that are getting added to this most anticipated list. And I think there's a good chance I will get to all of those. And then the maybes are just bonus points at that point. So really looking forward to getting to more of these books. And I'm glad that it's gone so well so far. Let's move into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. Like I said, I took a bit of a reading break over the weekend, so there's not a whole lot to talk about. I did pick up a book over the weekend because there were odd moments where we were sitting out on the patio, enjoying the day, and things like that. I didn't want to pick up anything that I was going to feel involved in because I really did want that reading break. So something came to me like a bolt from the blue, a book that was loaned to me by my neighbor, A Serving of Scandal by Prue Leith. Prue Leith is famous now because she is the replacement for Mary Berry on the Great British Bake Off. I had no idea until my neighbor loaned this to me that she had also written novels. So this was loaned to me, and I thought, hey, maybe that'll be fun. I didn't love it. In fact, I didn't like it, to be perfectly honest. It's fine for what it is, which is like a throwaway novel that you don't have to take too seriously or dedicate a whole lot of thought to. It's perfectly fine as that. It's not a great book, though, if I'm being honest. And I did skim through the last half of the book because I wasn't liking it. And kind of like what I mentioned with Paradise, Nevada, I don't feel like I missed out on anything by doing a lot of skimming to see what happens in the end. The premise of this book is that you have a caterer named Kate McKinnon, but not the Kate McKinnon from SNL. That would have been a better book. She does some events for government officials where she meets Oliver, who is I think the British equivalent of the Secretary of State. That's kind of what I'm getting from it. They meet a couple of times at events, and eventually, it's a slow burn, but they eventually have a sort of flirtation, and then scandal erupts because there are rumors that they're having an affair. They are not. And the way they handle it causes rifts and then getting back together, potentially, things like that. Part of where I was having trouble with this is that the writing's not great. It's fine for what it is. But the characters are maddening. And I really couldn't get around that. Like, Kate is a terrible caterer. Just an absolutely terrible caterer. every catering event she takes part in is a disaster. And the first two are not really her fault. However, when every single catering event that she gets into is a disaster, eventually it is her fault. And there are mistakes that she makes that are kind of just mind-boggling. It's like, get your life together, girl. Oh my God. In one of them, there's not enough food. There are not enough courses. And when Oliver, the Secretary of State, basically goes back to the kitchen to find out what happened, she says that not enough food had been picked off of the menu that she had submitted, and she tried to let people know that it was going to be a disaster, but nobody would listen to her. Okay, that one's passable. But then she's getting ready for a catering event, and at the last minute, she goes to check on the coq au vin that has been in the refrigerator, and it turns out it's not there. She can't find it. She calls her visiting mother, and her visiting mother left it on the floor behind the shed that she converted into a walk-in refrigerator. And it's been eaten by foxes. And okay, not her fault, but still weird that this happened. And at a later one, she accidentally grabs a friend of hers who is a chef and helps her with her catering events. She accidentally grabs his beetroot powder instead of raspberry. So she needs to completely redo her dessert at the last minute at this catering event because it's a disaster. She's promised raspberry, and it's just infuriating. And Oliver is a terrible person, basically. He has a wife who is written as a terrible woman. You are not supposed to sympathize with her. You are really supposed to dislike her. Well done, Prue. I didn't like her. But I don't like him either. Like, his wife is really into horses. His daughters are really into horses. He keeps thinking that he wants to spend time. He's a little jealous of all the time that his wife gets to spend with the daughters. He wants that sort of relationship, but he doesn't do anything to relate to them at all. In one part, he kind of lamely offers to go along to one of their writing events, and then the wife says, all right, well, if you're coming, I could use your help. And he's upset internally because now he actually has to be involved. He has to spend the whole day doing it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't enjoy it at all. And then at the end of the day, at dinner, his daughters are talking about horses, and he's irritated that they're not talking about things that interest him. And it's like, I don't have patience for him. And I don't have patience for Kate. So this was a bit of a fail. I will continue to enjoy Prue on the Great British Bake Off, but I will not be revisiting another one of her books. You know, for the circumstance in which I read it, it was fine. And I'm thankful to my neighbor for loaning this to me, but I will be returning it tomorrow. And that will be that. Once I got back into the work week, I dove into another two books. The physical book that I am working on right now is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I have been talking about this book, it seems like all year, because it is the book that I wanted to do for my Pulitzer Prize project next, and I'm finally getting around to it. I am a little less than 100 pages into it, and there are 1,037 pages, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 1,037 pages. I have a long way to go. And the first 50 pages made me a little weary, I'm not going to lie, because why I thought this would be interesting to follow up on Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry is that this book does a very different thing from what he was attempting to do with Lonesome Dove. Larry McMurtry grew up in Texas at a time when cowboys were still alive and could tell him stories about their experience of the Old West. But as he grew up, he came to question all of the mythology around the Old West and what he saw as problematic things that those myths enforced in society. So Lonesome Dove is told in the structure of a Western, but it is very much questioning what Westerns stand for. Margaret Mitchell grew up at a time when people who had experienced the South before the Civil War and lived during the Civil War were still around to tell her stories about the Old South. But instead of growing up to question the value of the Old South and what it stood for, Margaret Mitchell grew up to enforce the ideas and the mythology around it. And Gone with the Wind is just, it's that in a nutshell. And I've been looking for evidence in the first 100 pages, and it will be interesting to see if there's any evidence in the latter part of the book of anything like what Larry McMurtry is doing in Lonesome Dove, where you're using the tropes of something, but actually revealing that more is going on. And I haven't seen that. In fact, black people are introduced in the book as cowardly and ineffective and not as good as a white woman who is doing what they can't do. Basically, there's a wild horse and it tramples two of the enslaved people that she has on her plantation, and the other two are described as pop-eyed and hanging from the rafters while she manages the horse. And that's not great, and that continues, basically. 2 pages later, it is mentioned that the enslaved people are leaving the fields and they are described as having shrill, careless laughter, which feels funny to have careless laughter when you've just been working in somebody else's field all day. But hey, by and large, that is the depiction that black people are getting in this book so far. There is one character that might be used to subvert that a little bit in the rest of the book, so I'm going to withhold judgment, and that's Mammy, because she is afforded a personality and is allowed to exert will over other characters, but so far her depiction hasn't been great. So I'm going to give the book a little bit of benefit of the doubt and say that maybe Mammy will be something of a measuring presence on the rest of the depiction in the book, but so far it's not great. I will say though that I am seeing some of what Larry McMurtry did with Lonesome Dove in the depiction of women in this book and their ability to exert power in the world, because the women are very much play acting at a sort of helplessness and actually exerting a lot of will in the world. Not all women in the book, but Mammy is one of them, and that's why I'm going to give the book the benefit of the doubt and see how her character arc plays out over the rest of the book. But Scarlet is certainly one of them. Her mother is certainly one of them. Her mother is quietly the authority over Tara, the plantation on which they live. The way her parents are described is that her father will be very angry, very brash, and loud, but people know not to really listen to him. They know to listen to Ellen, the mother, instead. So she is actually the person in charge, even though she has a very quiet presence. And Scarlet underestimates her mother, and there is some sly subversion there on Margaret Mitchell's part. I will definitely give the book credit for that, because Scarlet talks about how her mother doesn't notice anything that doesn't fit her version of the world or vision of the world or her sense of propriety. And yet her mother sees more than Scarlet knows, because her mother has to leave the house to help deliver a baby that is likely to die and help it get baptism rites before it dies. When she returns, Scarlet is talking about how she thinks that the overseer of Tara is the father of the baby, and her mother doesn't even see that. And then later that night, Scarlet overhears her mother telling the father that they need to fire the overseer. And then the next morning, that is what ends up happening. So Scarlet doesn't remark on that, but we as readers can see that her mother is clearly a lot more aware of the world, how it works, and things that are going on than Scarlet is. And I like that subversion, and I like this vision of the world as, you know, the women are forced into an area where it would seem that they are powerless, but they are actually exerting a lot of power. And I think that's interesting and good. However, I wish I was seeing it when it comes to race. And so far, I am not. The book is good. The writing is good. I'm not hating it. But that is what I'm interrogating as I read this book. But I'm not seeing what I had kind of hoped I would see and would have been surprised to see. I guess I wanted to be pleasantly surprised by this book. And so far, it is what I expected it to be. I hope that makes sense. The other book that I've been working on is an audio. It's Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. This was one of the New York Times best books of 2020. I will link that video down below. And this is a difficult book because of its subject matter. If you've read Educated by Tara Westover, it is very much in that mold. I mentioned on Twitter yesterday, I think, that if you want to know what it's like when I'm listening to this book, I use that GIF of Robert Downey Jr. where he's opening his eyes really wide and the text at the bottom of the GIF says internal screaming. That's pretty much it. There's so much bad that happens in this book. Basically, it follows the history of the treatment and understanding of schizophrenia in the United States over the last 100 years, but it does that by following the Galvin family. Mimi and Don Galvin had 12 kids from 1945 through 1965. 10 of them are boys, 2 of them are girls. 6 of the sons, I believe it's 6, were ultimately diagnosed with schizophrenia. And it's about the toll that that takes on the family, first of all. I mean, terrible things happen to these people. There's a murder-suicide, there is sexual abuse of the daughters in the family. There's a lot of harrowing stuff that happens within this family. And it is difficult to read for that, but it is also fascinating. And one of the things that is so fascinating about it is that it talks about the difference in understanding and how schizophrenia was originally blamed on mothers, because of course, mothers must be the blame for everything. So it talks briefly about how when 2 or 3 of her sons, I think at that time, had been diagnosed, Mimi Galvin started getting questioned by doctors about how she was as a mother and blamed for what she had done as a mother. And it is a difficult book in a lot of ways, and yet it is fascinating. It's kind of like Educated by Tara Westover. That is a book that I really love, but would have a very hard time reading again because of everything that happens in it. I'm halfway through this book right now, a little over halfway, I think maybe 54% of the way through, and it's due back from Libby at the end of the weekend. So I gotta get a hustle to get the last 5.5, maybe 6 hours in, and it should be doable. I need to finish this video, edit this video, finish work, and maybe listen while I'm doing some work. I can't say it's a pleasant reading experience, but it is a very interesting, engaging reading experience. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's everything I have for this Friday Reads video. I would love to hear what you've been up to this week, what you've read, what you've loved, what you've hated, any of that stuff. Please leave it in the comment section down below. As always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.